Thanks again for joining me today. I am sitting down with Michael Dermer, who is the founder and CEO of The Lonely Entrepreneur. He is considered the pioneer of the industry to reward people for being healthy. Very excited to understand his story, what that means, what he's done, what he's doing now. Michael, thanks so much for sitting down. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. I really appreciate you having me.
No, it's my pleasure. So you have a really interesting story, and I want you to tell it because I think that's when I look up your name, when I look up your past and the company that you had and the struggles and the issues that you went through building it and scaling it, and then, well, tell me what your origin story is and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I started my career, as you know, as a corporate lawyer in New York City. I was doing M&A for a large New York law firm after graduating from Northwestern Law School. But I was itching to start a business, but back then in the early 2000s, it's not like today where people threw business plans on your desk all day long. And I was just looking for something to start, even though I was in a big corporate law firm. And I literally stumbled upon and started what got to be known as the first company in the United States to reward people for being healthy. I was literally out to dinner with some friends, and one of my friends' wives was pregnant. And she said, "Hey, do you realize that for every 10 women that don't follow their prenatal care, it costs the healthcare system $1 million?" And I was like, wait a minute, why wouldn't you just pay these women to get their prenatal care? And that was it, the beginning of the end. That was the idea. And worked, at 1 o'clock in the morning, writing business plans after my M&A job, and then left and started, again, what got to be known as the first company to reward people for being healthy. So went from this very prestigious law firm to a basement like a lot of us do. And, in the early days of that business, not only was that concept new, it was offensive. The healthcare industry said, we are never going to reward people for being healthy. And we're like, wait a minute, every other consumer industry does that. And so for the first 5 years plus, we battled and scrapped and clawed and bootstrapped. And then from, 2006 to 2008, we really grew a lot for some very lean early years. Venture capital backed at that point. And so by 2008, we had built it up to, a 500-person company. And we had, quote unquote, made it. And basically define this new concept. And as you know, literally almost got destroyed overnight by the financial crisis of 2008. All of our clients were what every young entrepreneur dreams of, right? Large corporate America, right? And, as those companies got decimated, we almost got decimated with them. It was a healthcare technology, SaaS licensed business. And, our three biggest customers were Washington Mutual, Countrywide Financial, and General Motors, and only one of them still exists today. And nobody called me to tell me. And so we spent the better part of 3 years, working 20 hours a day to basically save this thing. It's spent 10 years building, and was fortunate enough, on the other end of the financial crisis, everybody had this interest in healthcare, and we bounced back and got approached by a bunch of investment bankers and got bought. So it's a great story in the end, but as you can imagine, an incredibly wild ride made only for big boys and girls.
Yeah, that's a lot of stress. It's funny, you had the highest highs and the lowest lows. As an entrepreneur, you had the whole range, right? And I'm actually on your site. It said you got destroyed in 10 days by the financial crisis of 2008, nearly destroyed in 10 days. So I can only imagine the toll that took on your mental health and well-being. That's tough.
Well, it was literally true because, if you remember October 2008 when Bear Stearns went down, it literally unraveled the financial markets quickly. And because we had a lot of financial institutions as customers, they literally, Washington Mutual, we probably had a $6 or $7 million, very highly profitable software license contract with, literally filed for a bankruptcy a week later. Because, their whole mortgage-backed securities unwound, stuff like that. But that was not in the brochure, I can tell you that much.
So what do you do? What is The Lonely Entrepreneur? So you sold your company. You still want to work. What are you doing now?
Well, after that experience, we went right from saving the company to M&A and selling it. And I was literally just chilling out in New York, where I'm from. And all I was doing was helping entrepreneurs for fun. just having cups of coffee with friends and friends of friends. And I wasn't really looking to do anything else. I'm only really attracted to bigger things that have an impact on society. So, things like rewarding people for being healthy was very attractive to me. And when I was sitting with somebody, they said being an entrepreneur is really lonely. And I was like, huh, that's interesting, and kind of forgot about it. And then I was walking down the street with a friend of mine in Union Square in New York, and I told him that, and he's like, what did you just say? And I'm like, lonely entrepreneur. He's like, you realize that's what we all share, is the struggle. And I go, yeah. And he goes, watch this. And we walked he dragged me into Starbucks, and he yelled, who here is a lonely entrepreneur? And everybody raised their hand. And I was like, okay, I got it. But my goal was, there were so many people out there with passion and great ideas that literally had so many gaps. And there's so much you need to know as an entrepreneur to be successful. And I didn't have a desire to kind of just write a book and stand in front of 20 people and give a lecture. I wanted to try to help people all over the place who were talking about this over dinner, or thinking about leaving their job, or, dealing with having to become one in COVID. And so we started Lonely Entrepreneur. We wrote a book about our journey, and then launched what you probably know is this kind of one-stop shop platform, which was really designed to give people a lot of the knowledge, tools, and support they need to have a better chance of success. So what we call it at Lonely Entrepreneur is turning your passion into success, by actually learning a lot of the different things you need to know to be a more successful entrepreneur.
And what is that? Well, first of all, I'm curious, how did you figure it out? Because, you were that lonely entrepreneur. So what resources did you lean on and in growing your company the first time?
What was really interesting, and I had a pretty good background to start. So I had a finance and M&A background. So the financing stuff and the corporate stuff was pretty easy. The hardest part that you learn along the way is that you have to build this organism. At first, your company looks like a solar system with your head in the middle, right? And then as you grow, you've got to start to look like an org chart, right? And you have to learn that. And I just remember a lot of people saying, the people that started early stage companies were not the people that should be ones running them longer term, right? Because there were different skill sets. And so I just really embraced the journey of trying to get better at it. No different than, I played college baseball, the number of hours you spend in a batting cage trying to get better at, and I looked at it the same way. And I just learned and read and talked to people. And what you realize, it was it was a hard to execute, but it was a pretty standard formula, right? Of what does a good company look like? Didn't always get it right by any means. But I just kind of embraced it, made mistakes, and just tried to stay very true to what I think is the most important thing, which is the thing that makes you different, your vision. But then how do you translate that into like an operating organism that actually can make that work? And, what I just described, people have written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books about to try to solve.
Yeah. But you're not wrong. The tagline is the difference between success and failure is your perspective. Which sounds nice, but then there's obviously operationalizing it and actually bringing that and working with it in your specific, industry, niche, environment, vertical. But you're saying that there can be some sort of methodology for an entrepreneur to understand that perspective and then apply it to everything they do as they're growing and learning and scaling a business.
Yeah,
so
100%.
What is it? Yeah. Sorry.
Well, if you think about it, no, you're exactly right. When you think about it, is once you kind of put the entrepreneur on your chest and you're this entrepreneur superhero, we all think that the normal operating metrics for businesses don't apply, right? And like setting a goal and priorities and operating metrics and process, like all this really unsexy stuff that is actually what makes a vision come to life in something, right? And the ability to connect those dots was really the key, especially, during the financial crisis when things are moving all over the place. I mean, you literally need to say, hey, my goal is this, my priorities are this, and the strategies I'm going to use. And then I need, basic boring stuff like people and process and metrics to make it happen. But I still think the most important thing, and I know your audience is very attuned to kind of sales and marketing, we still think the most important thing was what we say is finding a playground where nobody else is playing. You can do all the stuff that I just said and execute the best way, but if you don't have something that really defines that playground for you, I mean, if you think about my business, rewarding people for being healthy, all we did was take the same exact concept that being used everywhere in, credit card programs and airline programs and and retailer loyalty programs and apply them to healthcare. But once we did, we found our playground, and we started to own it. And then hopefully, if you're smart enough to either by yourself or with your colleagues to put that into place with those kind of operating foundations, that's, I think, the combination for success.
I appreciate that, and I think that's a smart way to look at it. Now, as people sort of understand more about the lonely entrepreneur, because you did create a community for entrepreneurs.
Yep.
What type of entrepreneur? What are people looking for when they go and see you? What do you offer them? What's the value add for a lonely entrepreneur, for example, as opposed to you're in Y Combinator? There's a lot of these types of programs. So I want to differentiate what you do.
Yeah. So the product that I mentioned to you, the subscription-based product, is called the Learning Community. And what we're really trying to do is guide you every day. There's great programs out there like Y Combinator and incubators and accelerators and workspace programs. We just feel like there's so many things that you need to know as an entrepreneur. You can almost define entrepreneurism not by the way it's been defined maybe historically, like passion. Like you have passion and grit, right? And that's an entrepreneur. As opposed to an entrepreneur is the amalgamation of 100 skills, right? And so what we're trying to do with our platform is to say, there's all these skills that you need to learn. You need to be able to manage yourself. You need to be able to do great sales presentations. You need to be able to manage your team. You need to be able, there's all this stuff that goes into it, not to mention the personal stuff. And so I think that there's so many kind of early stage entrepreneurs that have passion, have grit, and have a great idea, but haven't had the opportunity or the wherewithal to develop those skills. And as you know, as we were talking about before, everyone's at different stages, right? Someone's in corporate America thinking about leaving. Somebody else has just got an idea, and somebody else has got a 6-person company, right? And they're raising money for the first time. So for us, it's about how do you get to be a better entrepreneur every day? And through this online platform and the support we provide, we're trying to be their sidekick at every step of their journey, where they have online learning, but at the same time, they have access to a community and coaching that guides them at every step of their journey.
And one thing that you mentioned, and you sort of highlighted on your site, and I like it a lot. There's people that are in all walks of life, all stages in their journey, trying to do a thing. The side hustle is more popular than ever now. And one of the pieces that you actually mentioned was entrepreneurism is not a nice to have. It's a skill that must be unlocked in every company. So speak to me about what that means for somebody who's in a company that doesn't understand how they can associate with the word entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's a great point. So there's two kind of lenses of this. One lens is, okay, you're in a company and you're thinking about leaving and doing your own thing. And that applies to some of the things that we've just been talking about. But companies, to compete, have to think like entrepreneurs, right? I mean, Amazon should not exist, right? Walmart should have created Amazon, and Blockbuster should create Netflix, and Sony should have created Spotify. Like, these organizations had all the wherewithal to do these other things. And today, if you don't think, we call it think like an entrepreneur. If you don't think like an entrepreneur within a larger company, you're just going to become kind of the next, company that just doesn't stay up with the times. And that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because large companies don't operate that way. They think about quarterly numbers, and it's really hard for them to innovate. So we have a program called Think Like an Entrepreneur, which is a training program which helps large organizations take what you learn from entrepreneurs and employ it within a corporate environment to try to create some of these methodologies and thought processes that entrepreneurs have all day long, but just don't regularly get deployed in a corporate environment.
Do you feel like, do you have advice for people that feel like they're being, I guess, held down or just like their ideas are being choked out in the organization? Like, how do they actually thrive in a company that is by the quarterly numbers with all the red tape? I'm curious as to how to do that.
So there are the people that rise, the men and women that rise to senior levels within organizations are the ones that are able to deliver results, right? They're the ones that if you ask them, what do you do with your job? The first thing they're going to do is give you a number, right? I deliver X. I deliver this sales or this expense savings or whatever it may be, this shareholder value. Those people are always interested in innovations that work, right? So if you're stifled and you're in an organization, I mean, think about it. We were talking about before, we sold the health plans. Health plans did the same thing for 50 years. And the people that you were selling to were the very same people that put in place the things that you were trying to get rid of, right?
Yeah.
So, and the same thing exists within an organization. What I would say is I would respectfully, whether it's the innovation people or the senior leaders in your group, and say, listen, do your homework, like come up with a business plan, come up with a business case. Don't just walk in somebody who's the executive VP of blah, 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 and say, I have an idea. Do your work and put it in a package, but say, I believe that this can deliver us revenue, competitive differentiation, significant cost savings, and I'd like to have the opportunity to present it to you. And I can tell you that the people that are in those roles, certainly you and me, we would always want to have that conversation if it was something that was credible, even if you're stifled at different levels of your organization.
Yeah, not a good, very good point. Very well said. I think that's something to take note of. Like, you don't, even if you feel like the organization doesn't support, or perhaps you don't see the peers, your peers working on things like this, take that initiative. And I think the takeaway message, the lesson is to, you'd be surprised at what you can accomplish if you start going out there and, like you said, acting like an entrepreneur within a company and pushing these ideas in front of the right people or presenting them in front of the right people. It could really take that career to the next level within an organization.
Yep. I can tell you. I can tell you what I did when I started my company. Our clients were health plans, and we're an early stage company. I used to literally sit down at 8 o'clock at night and leave voicemails for the CEOs of our nation's largest healthcare companies, United Healthcare, Cigna, Aetna, and I got 7 out of 10 calls back. And that wasn't because of my bubbly personality. I basically said, listen, there's going to be a health plan here in the United States that's going to have a reward program just like Marriott and Citibank. And the one that does is going to win the consumer, and the one that doesn't is going to fall behind. This is what we're doing. Give us a call back. Right? So the CEO we'd normally say, you could never get to the CEO. If you go to somebody and say, this is how you really win, or this is how you really lose, right? They will break all the rules for you. Obviously, you have to be concise and on point and really talk to something that really makes a difference. But the people that rise to senior levels because they cut through things and ultimately deliver some kind of financial performance.
Mm-hmm. One point that I wanted to highlight, because you list off a whole bunch of problems with mentors that align themselves with entrepreneurs. People that oversell themselves, people that are only looking for winners, so on and so on, and it keeps going and going. So as an entrepreneur, it's scary out there to align with someone. Yeah. How do you look for the right person?
There are a lot of mentors that are doing all the right things, but then there's also a bunch of mentors that are trying to sell you things, trying to bring in their own financial partners, trying to bring in their own, marketing partners and things like that. Here's what I would say. A lot of times, mentors that maybe don't always have your best interest at heart. Like I said, there's many that do. Mm-hmm. A lot of times they prey on the risks that entrepreneurs are feeling. When you're talking to somebody and you have a mentor and it's somebody you really like and you're connecting with, go ask a colleague of yours, not somebody that has the same last name in you, or somebody you're dating, or your brother, just somebody whose business judgment you respect, and say to them, hey, listen, I'm thinking about getting involved in this mentor. Can you talk to them for a half hour, an hour? Because, they're a completely objective view, right? And they will come in and say, well, I think this person's a little to this, a little to that. And that can really help you, especially, you talk about the book and this whole idea of perspective. We all know this. When we're in the middle of it, we have a really tough time seeing things, what other people can see really clearly. That also works a lot when you're hiring employees, right? When you're working 24 hours a day, the person in front of you might just hire them just because they can speak, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're so busy. If you go to, if I went to you and said, hey, listen, could you interview this person for me? You would give me a reasoned, thoughtful, objective view, and I'd be able to make the right type of decision, just like I would with a mentor.
Yeah, good advice. It's very good advice. I've never heard it framed like that. I've never heard that suggestion before, but I really like that a lot. Especially when you're, as an entrepreneur, you're right. You're just overtired, absolutely exhausted. None of the decisions you're making are probably the right ones. So you're trying to look for all these little tricks and tips to make it easier on yourself. I like that a lot.
And that's what we said before about it being a series of skills. Yeah. Right. It's not. Yes, the big things matter, but it's also how you hire the wrong person, you get the wrong mentor. you're already kind of, behind the eight ball a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. The last thing, not to inundate with lessons from the book, but I thought there was a few really, really good ones. And then I wanted to ask just some personal insights from your career. But the four P's, you mentioned that perspective can be influenced by pressure, passion, pleasure, pain.
Yep.
Or a flawed perspective.
Yep.
Can you speak a little bit more on that and extrapolate just what that means exactly and how to sort of watch for that as an entrepreneur? I think we sort of touched on it a little bit, but just to make it clear and succinct.
Yeah, it was really interesting when you take a step back after I sold my company and you're like, what do we all really go through? Like when we were writing the book, we were saying, what do we really go through? And this whole idea of the four P's came out. We started saying, well, you have passion, right? And you're like, well, I'm going to make meatballs, right? And somebody will go, well, the world has plenty of meatballs. And you'll be like, well, not my meatballs, right? So we all have that kind of, but then you also have, pressure, right? There's a lot on you, sometimes financial pressure, sometimes you leave a job. You have the pleasure of, the first time you print your business card, you get your first customer, it's like your first kiss, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the pain, when the first time an investor tells you that they don't like your business, it's like somebody's calling your baby ugly. And we're really invested in we're always under the influence of these four P's that make us do the wrong thing. When we're under pressure, right, we hire the wrong person, right? When we're feeling our passion about our meatballs, sometimes we're not listening to the feedback of the market saying, hey, it doesn't work this way, but it might work that way. So we just always have to be really cognizant of the fact that we're kind of under the influence of these things so we can employ some of the techniques we were talking about before.
Smart. I wanted to ask a couple like life lesson, professional lesson questions just from your past. But before I move off the topic of lonely entrepreneur, what you're working on now, was there anything that I didn't ask that I should have about what you're working on?
No, I think, all this stuff is available on lonelyentrepreneur.com. The only thing that we're doing, which we're super excited about, is we're launching a Black entrepreneur initiative where we're taking our platform and with the help of corporate and philanthropic and government sponsors throughout the country to try to have, our little place in the world on the social and economic justice issues, trying to empower 100,000 Black entrepreneurs across the country. So super excited about, obviously the institutional issues are wide and deep. And while those are getting fixed, we think what better way to try to have an impact than to put the tools in the hands of Black entrepreneurs. So that's all.
Is that launched? Is there like a place that people can go and check that out, or is that still in the works?
Next week. Launching
okay, cool.
Next week. Yeah.
Okay, so by the time this comes out, it's going to be about 2 weeks from now when this comes out. It'll be live. So I guess still same domain,
Yep.
lonelyentrepreneur.com. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so now just a few life insight questions that I like to ask, given your past and experience. What was the biggest challenge in your mind of being an entrepreneur, and how did you overcome it?
I would say that when everything was kind of crumbling in 2008, up until that point, it was hard, but we very much believed in our vision. I would say the balance of ego and humility. I was a guy, I was a college athlete, an M&A lawyer. You're so hard charging about your vision and what you want to do. And what you realize is great leaders combine that ego, if you will. Now, listen, and we were telling the healthcare industry that you had to do things you would never do. I mean, that takes ego, right? You're going to tell United Healthcare they're going to do something that they said they would never do. And sometimes, and I would say I was included in this, the humility that has to go with that, because you have to learn. Like, you have to get better at being an entrepreneur. I remember saying to my board one time, there's not one book about being a CEO. Like, if there was one book, you just go on Amazon and say, give me the CEO book, and you'd follow it. So I think the one thing that I really learned is you have to be able to have this very delicate balance between your ego to push forward and yet your humility to understand that you've actually got to get a group of people to follow you. Right. And that's when you do that, then you kind of got the great combination of the passion along with the execution that goes with it. It's one of the lessons that I think I probably learned the hard way.
Well, yeah, but still, it's the fact that you did learn it, right? That's the takeaway. That's the hardest part, right? I think every entrepreneur is going to struggle with personal and identity issues and ego issues and self-awareness issues. But it's like the success, the key is to overcome those eventually. That's what will take you to the point where you can have, I think you said, a 500-person company that can eventually exit, right? Because I don't think you can ever get to that point without overcoming those types of issues.
You know, and if you ask a mother, right, the day after she had her first child, were you great at this mom thing, right? Most moms that would be honest with you would say, no, I'm just trying to make sure that I don't kill this little person the next day, right? And they embrace the journey because this is their child, of doing whatever they can, however they can, to make it happen. And that ends up being a series of skills, right, that they get better at, that they're committed to. And I wish kind of somebody had said that to me when I was 20, right, that you got to get better at all these different skills to have a better chance of success. And some of these are these perspectives like we're talking about that are not, just income statements and balance sheets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What is the biggest area related to entrepreneurship or startups that you're curious about, you're investigating, and that you're interested in right now?
I think more so than anything is, how do we move the needle on some of our less fortunate parts of society that were either less fortunate before or now have been forced because of COVID to turn to entrepreneurism, or as we would say, they're entrepreneurs either by choice or necessity. So there are so many more people, right, that are going to have to do their own thing. So what I'm really trying to have the biggest impact on is, don't get me wrong, I was a Wall Street, M&A guy, and that's all sexy, and that's what gets people's name in the paper. But I had all this education, like we talked about before. What happens when you're the kid that graduates high school in Queensbridge, New York, right, who's going to have to do their own thing, right? And the educational system is not necessarily empowering them. How do we teach them skills? They may not create the next Facebook, but they sure as hell could go and create a little graphic design business, right? And so that to me is the part of entrepreneurism that I'm most interested in, is how can we empower the people before that face challenges, but now that has become whatever it is, 10, 20, 30% of the population now that has to figure out a way to create a better life for themselves and can't rely on, what's going to happen in the next 5 years.
I like that a lot. Do you have any suggestions? That's a tough one to figure out, because it's a huge amount of people now that are suffering from unemployment.
Yeah, I think the foundation of it is really, as I said before, finding that playground. That playground doesn't have to be big, right? It could be really small. Like if you want to create a pizza store in your local neighborhood, you can create a really good pizza store in your local neighborhood, right? Those things on a smaller level are very doable, but you have to really find your playground that makes you different, right? Not just something that everybody else is doing. If you think about, take a yoga studio, right? Every single yoga studio is now online, right? In fact, if you got dropped here from Saturn and you started a yoga studio, you wouldn't even think you could have a physical yoga studio. You'd be like, oh, of course it's all online. We've got to be able to compete against that, and compete against that when everybody's charging less and less just to get customers. So finding that unique niche, like I said before, rewarding people for being healthy was not that different. It was right next to these reward programs that were run by really, really big companies. So taking the time to really find your special sauce where you have special know-how, when you go running by your apartment or your home, and when you turn right, there's a pothole right there, right? Every one of us possesses some kind of know-how that can be turned into a business that is actually unique. And to me, we call it finding this playground, but that to me is the most important thing, because then you can turn that into a business. If you don't find that, then you're obviously competing with a lot of people with oftentimes more money and resources, and with a lot of people doing the same thing these days.
Good. How do you continue to learn and grow? What are your resources or your go-to sources?
The one thing that I think the lonely entrepreneur knows is we know what an organization is supposed to look like. What's great for us is we interact with so many entrepreneurs of every way, shape, or form, stage, industry, gender, ethnicity, And we just learn so much from the language we hear from them. And probably the biggest learning that we have is a lot of times the question that they're asking is not really the answer they need, right? So somebody says, what kind of legal entity should I form, or when should I launch my website? And I think the biggest learning for us is, think about it. It's almost like if a retailer could be in the minds of every single one of their customers and hear exactly what was going on. We get that type of learning from the people that we're interacting every day. So for us, the learning is how do we make the journey simpler, right? And take these really complex things and turn them into really simple steps. Here's the 5 things you got to start with. Here's how to do number 1, even if you don't know how to do it. That, really, they say great leaders are great simplifiers. And that's what we're really focused on. How do we make it easy for people that maybe don't always have the foundational skills? And that's the learning that you're really embracing.
Do you have personal resources that you rely on, that you like books, podcasts, audibles that you think people should go check out that are great entrepreneurial resources that are more tactical than?
To me, I love, there's a book called The Art of War. And obviously it's a big, long book. But some of the tactics in there are, about, how do you win when you're disadvantaged, which is obviously like gross oversimplification of that book.
But the message rings true. I get it.
Right. If your opponent is fast, don't try to outrun them. Right. That type of stuff. That is the stuff that I really, embrace more than anything. I don't think that, I think that with respect to other resources, I'm always exposing myself to different things, but I'm trying to take it and put it into kind of a method. Because how many times do we all interact with these things and we take a piece from here, a piece from here, a piece from here? It doesn't all fit together nicely.
Or we just don't take any pieces, and then it's just a waste of time. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to, in everything that I listen to, I try to take the snippets and fit it into a framework. But there's The Art of War. It's a long book, but they have little Reader's Digest versions that are probably worth it.
That's a heavy book for a light entrepreneurial read, but I appreciate that. Listen, I love some history lessons too. I think that you can always find some insight if you read history, because I don't think anything we're trying to solve for now hasn't already been solved for in the past. So there's a baby version too. There's like a 100-page little short version too that I encourage you to pick up. Good. I know, that's good. You mentioned this before, and let me know if it still rings true, but the lesson you tell your younger self. You mentioned one lesson you tell your younger self. Is that the lesson you would tell your younger self?
That's a great question. I would just say go slower. I think that after I sold my company, like about a week later, after the kind of air came out of the balloon, if you will, I really felt like I hadn't used my brain for 10 years. Right. And we have this thing in the Lonely Entrepreneur book about being a deliberate, thoughtful, and unemotional leader. And I was trying to think back about, how many days was I actually that? And going slower, and the things that you pick, right? You do well and you do with intensity. But a lot of times in your early days, with all the passion and energy you have about your baby, you just don't stick to certain things, do them well. You can do them with intensity. That's fine. But if you decided you're going to sell 10 bananas because that's a strategy, then go sell the hell out of 10 bananas, but don't go oranges, bananas, and apples and all that. So I think just going slower would have been, probably the biggest piece of advice.
And the last question before I get some socials and websites from you, what does success mean for you?
That to me was really easy because it was never about money for me. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a nice family. My family owns real estate. And for me, when I was looking for a business, if we said we could, take the jacket you're wearing and we could guaranteed make $1 billion, I wouldn't have any interest in doing it. To me, it had to have an impact on society, and it had to be new and different, right? And I felt incredibly fortunate to stumble upon that with rewarding people for being healthy. And I frankly wasn't looking to do something else yet. Mm-hmm. And then when somebody said the lonely entrepreneur, to be able to say to anybody, lonely entrepreneur, and you're tapping into that same thing, something that actually can help society because it's helped people, have a better chance of being fulfilled. That to me is success. Success is just when you hear about an entrepreneur that said, I closed a sale, I raised money, I hired this great employee, and the next day they get to wake up before the alarm rings, not because they're worried, but because they're excited. Mm-hmm. That to me is what success is. And there's money that goes with that and all that fun stuff, but that's what it's all about for us.
I like that a lot. And most important question, where can people get the book? Go check out the website, your socials, all of that.
First of all, thank you so much for such a thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. You know your stuff, and there's a lot of value here. So thank you for really good answers.
Thank you. LonelyEntrepreneur.com is our website. There's also all the social stuff, which is you'll find Lonely Entrepreneur on Instagram. The Lonely E is Twitter. Lonely Entrepreneur on Facebook. And the book can be found both on our website and on Amazon, all called The Lonely Entrepreneur.